A Course in
What?
with Cynthia Morgan.
Hey, course friends. Welcome to A Course in What? I'm Cynthia Morgan, and this is a podcast in which I read and discuss the text of A Course in Miracles. And A Course in What is a free weekly podcast that comes out each Tuesday. And this is episode number 32. And I'm going to dive right into what we're reading. We are on Chapter 3, The Innocent Perception, Section 3, Perception versus Knowledge. And that's on page 40 in the text. And I really like this section. I don't know, it's just, it's very clear. Jesus distinguishes between the terms and ideas of perception and knowledge. And perception and knowledge are two different levels. Perception is a part of duality or the dream. Perception comes from a split mind. You need a perceiver and a perceived, something outside of you, in order to have perception. So perception requires a body. True perception, as we read in the last section, section 2, miracles as true perception. Now, that's a term used in the Course to describe seeing the world through the vision of the Holy Spirit. True perception is miracle-mindedness. Knowledge, on the other hand, is a term used to describe heaven or our non-dualistic state of mind. That's not to be confused with, obviously, the traditional Christian idea of heaven. And the word knowledge is not to be confused with the idea of knowledge as it's used commonly in this world, which means to learn something, therefore to gain knowledge. Knowledge in A Course in Miracles is a knowingness of our oneness. Again, that word is synonymous with heaven. Gnosticism, by the way, comes from the Greek word gnosis, Gnosis, which means knowledge, and that term meant a spiritual insight. To summarize a little bit about these terms, the lowest level is perception, which is obviously related to the ego and the dream of separation. Then true perception is still a part of the dream of separation, but it's using the Holy Spirit's vision instead of your own. Then knowledge, that highest level, is the transcendence of all perception and levels and duality. It's our reality of oneness with God. So just thinking of the term know versus perception, there's a certainty in knowing. When we say we know something, we're very sure of it. Perceiving isn't quite the same as knowing. Okay, so I think I just summarized this entire section, but we'll take it line by line and see what we come up with. So we'll begin with paragraph 1, sentence 1. We have been emphasizing perception and have said very little about knowledge as yet. And so here he's referencing that in the last couple of sections, he's talked about perception a lot. But again, he's telling us we need to move on now to what's beyond perception, which is knowledge. 2, this is because perception must be straightened out before you can know anything. So that's why it's been emphasized. And what does it mean to straighten out our perception? It means to change that perception from an ego perception to true perception. And we can't skip steps. We have to start with where we are and have those perceptions cleansed. So that's why the first workbook lesson is nothing I see means anything. Jesus is undoing our perception, our lower ego-based perception, and making room for a new, truer perception. So he's straightening our perceptions out. Then once our perceptions are straightened out, we can move on to knowingness. We can come to understand our oneness with God. 3, to know is to be certain. And we just talked about that certainty. It's certain because there's no duality. There's nothing to choose between. There's just a knowingness. There's just oneness. 4, uncertainty means that you do not know. So if you are uncertain, you don't know your truth or anyone else's truth either. 5, knowledge is power because it is certain, and certainty is strength. So our invincibility, our strength comes from that understanding or knowing of our truth. Your strength, your peace, your love, your well-being all come from knowing that truth. 6, perception is temporary. Eventually, as the introduction to A Course in Miracles says, we will all wake up. It's a required course. No one gets to stay in the illusion or dualism forever. 7, as an attribute of the belief in space and time, it is subject to either fear or love. It, meaning perception, is subject to either fear or love. And that's because perception comes from a belief in separation, a belief in time and space. And this next sentence goes on to explain this a little more. 8, misperceptions produce fear, and true perceptions foster love, but neither brings certainty because all perception varies. Perception varies because it's unstable, it's uncertain. Only knowledge is certain. So even if you have true perception, it's still not knowledge. It's like the difference between the love you feel in the world for those people or animals or plants around you, but then the love you will feel when you awaken from the dream will be even more fulfilling, greater than that love. That love in the world will probably seem paltry in comparison. 9, that is why it is not knowledge. The variable nature of perception is why it isn't knowledge. Even what we think of as love can turn to hate. Perceptions can change. Knowledge does not. It's consistent. 10, true perception is the basis for knowledge, but knowing is the affirmation of truth and beyond all perceptions. So having a loving perception is a step to knowledge. It's the basis of that knowledge, but knowledge is beyond that state. Paragraph 2, sentence 1. All your difficulties stem from the fact that you do not recognize yourself, your brother, or God. All of our problems come from the level of perception. And again, that level requires a body. Thus, we see ourselves and everyone else from this starting point, including God. And from here, we will constantly be wrong. We will be deceived. Our body's eyes were meant to deceive us. We can't know our brother when we perceive him as separate from ourselves. We can't know God from the perception of a body. 2, to recognize means to, quote, know again, implying that you knew before. The Course is taking us back to the beginning, back to oneness. That's the whole goal, is about undoing and going back to that original state when we knew that unity with God and the sonship before the belief in separation. So that's that knowingness. We knew that once before and we'll know it again. 3, you can see in many ways because perception involves interpretation, and this means that it is not whole or consistent. So when Jesus says you can see in many ways, I think that means that there are myriad perceptions within the illusion. As we all know, two people growing up with the same parents can have a completely different experience. Their perceptions or interpretations are vastly different. Their experience is not going to be whole or united. 4. The miracle, being a way of perceiving, is not knowledge. Again, the miracle is a step in the right direction. We want to have those shifts in perception, but again, it's not knowledge. He keeps repeating this over and over again. It's the beginning stage of looking beyond the body's eyes. 5. It is the right answer to a question, but you do not question when you know. The miracle is always the right answer to any question because it's the answer of love. It's the answer of oneness. It's the answer of forgiveness. But again, it's not the final stop. There's no questioning in knowledge. There's only certainty. 6. Questioning illusions is the first step in undoing them. So it's interesting, right? Because he's saying there's no questioning in your oneness with God, but then he's saying, but you do need to question illusions right now because that's the first step to getting to that place where you don't question anything. So questioning this world, questioning what you believe to be true, questioning reality with a small r, questioning everything, questioning authority, as the bumper sticker says, those are the first steps to finding out the truth. The real authority that we should question is the ego because we all see that ego as being right. And that's our biggest problem is that we listen to our ego thought system. So we have to start questioning everything he's saying. Is this really serving me? 7. The miracle or the right answer corrects them. Them meaning illusions. So again, the right answer is always the miracle, that shift in perception from fear to love, away from the body, back to the mind, back to where the real problem is, the belief in separation, and back to where the real solution is, which is to the oneness in our mind, to spirit, so to speak. 8. Since perceptions change, their dependence on time is obvious. So perception depends on time and space. Without time and space, without this world, without the body, how would we perceive? So perception in A Course in Miracles terms always requires a body. It requires the physical world. 9. How you perceive at any given time determines what you do, and actions must occur in time. So how we perceive is the determiner of what we do within the illusion. And how we perceive really is just another way of saying who is our teacher, the ego or the Holy Spirit, that's guiding us through the illusion, that's interpreting our experiences, our perception. And so that guides our actions. And that's not only true in terms of whether we perceive someone as attacking us or just coming from fear. Those two different perceptions would lead to different actions, most likely. And also how we perceive our body, that too determines our actions. Who is our teacher as we move through the world? But also, what we choose to see determines when we wake up or if we stay asleep. So actions occur in time because actions are determined by our perceptions. The act of waking up has to occur in the dream. There is no waking up in oneness. 10. Knowledge is timeless because certainty is not questionable. It's not questionable because there are no perceptions or levels in knowledge. There's no duality. That's why it's timeless. It's beyond time and space. 11. You know when you have ceased to ask questions. So this is an interesting sentence to me. I read it two ways. You will know. In other words, you will be in a state of knowingness. So you will know when you have ceased to ask questions. But it also could be read, you know, like no one needs to tell you. You just know when you have ceased to ask questions. I don't know. Does that make sense? I for sure think it's the first interpretation, but I just think it's kind of fun to play around with that sentence. Again, the sentence is, you know when you have ceased to ask questions. So I'll leave that up to you and how you interpret that in light of how the Course is using the term know or knowledge. Paragraph 3, sentence 1. The questioning mind perceives itself in time and therefore looks for future answers. So Jesus just said in the last paragraph that a questioning mind is a good thing, at least from our state of mind. So this questioning mind looks to the future for the answers, meaning that, in my opinion, it's an open mind. A questioning mind is an open mind. 2, the closed mind believes the future and the present will be the same. So contrasting the questioning mind or the open mind with the closed mind, that closed mind is, I know all the answers, period. And there's no hope for knowledge in that state of mind. And that is ego. I will tell you what is real. I will tell you what the answers are. That's why the only requirement for a miracle is to have the little willingness, to be wrong, to see things differently. There's not willingness in a closed mind. That's why that state is a dead end. 3, this establishes a seemingly stable state that is usually an attempt to counteract an underlying fear that the future will be worse than the present. So why do we choose a closed mind? Because to the ego, it produces a stable state. Even though from a higher perspective or a true perspective, we can see that there's nothing stable about the ego tells us that our closed mind creates stability. There are no unanswered questions. We don't question anything. There's no possibility of being wrong. But here Jesus is saying that underlying that rigidness is simply a deep-seated fear. And of course, as we know, the ego is afraid of disappearing in the future. That's why it's so afraid of the future. It's afraid that we will catch on to its lies and forego listening to it. And all of this is a terrible possibility for the poor ego. So it lives in grave fear of the future, of being found out that it doesn't know anything. And also, I just have this thought that not only do we do this in our own lives, but it could also be referencing Christianity too. And Christianity steadfastly holds onto its dogma or truth, but underneath that is really a fear of Judgment Day. And that atonement that was referenced in the first section of this chapter could be what this is referencing as well. 4, this fear inhibits the tendency to question at all. The fear is so strong that we don't dare question the ego. The fear of God in Christians is so strong that they dare not question the Bible or their church leaders. Paragraph 4, true vision is the natural perception of spiritual sight, but it is still a correction rather than a fact. So here he's throwing in another word here, true vision. And I'm fairly certain that true vision is the same as true perception. They're both terms meaning that we see the world through the Holy Spirit's eyes, which sees beyond the body, beyond the physical world, and separateness. Jesus is emphasizing that our eyes are opening at the point when we experience true vision or true perception, but it's still a correction of the ego. It's still a shift in perception, and therefore it's not knowledge, because there's no correction or shift in oneness or heaven. It just is. The only fact is God. Everything else is open to interpretation. 2. Spiritual sight is symbolic and therefore not a device for knowing. So this paragraph talks about visions, as in visions of God, glimpsing God in one of those rare spiritual experiences, like in meditation, or you hear about in prayer, or in a near-death experience, or on ayahuasca, or however it comes to you. And although those experiences can be really helpful in awakening your spiritual eye, your spiritual sight, in fact, they can be life-changing for some people. But Jesus is cautioning us here in this paragraph by saying they're still temporary. They are still momentary. They're still fleeting. He's distinguishing between those experiences and knowledge, which is certain and lasting. 3. It is, however, a means of right perception, which brings it into the proper domain of the miracle. So these experiences can bring about really helpful shifts, just as the miracle does. And that can be beneficial to us within the illusion. It's another step, but it's not the final step. 4. A quote, vision of God would be a miracle rather than a revelation. So you may recall from very early on in these podcast episodes, we talked about, because the Course talked about, revelations, and those are direct experiences from God to us. So Jesus is basically saying that we shouldn't confuse a vision of God, which is like a miracle, with a revelation, which is that direct experience with God. 5. The fact that perception is involved at all removes the experience from the realm of knowledge. And the fact that it's experienced from within the dream of time and space removes it from outside of time and space, outside of the dream. 6. That is why visions, however holy, do not last. So he's not denying that these experiences can be holy. These experiences can be, but he's saying they're not your natural state of oneness because, once again, they're temporary and fleeting. When you experience heaven, there will be no comparison to anything you've ever experienced or felt within the dream. Okay, and we'll stop there for today and continue on and finish this section in the next podcast episode. So if you would like to stay in touch, we have a Facebook page for this podcast. It's at facebook.com/A Course in What. And you can also find me on Facebook at /Cynthia Morgan Hypnotherapy. And you can go to the website, cynthiamorgan.us. We have an email account at acourseinwhat@gmail.com. I always love hearing from you. If you have suggestions or comments or questions, please write them, or you can even call them. We have a phone number for this podcast, believe it or not. It's at 707-500-ACIW. All right, so until next time, thank you so much for joining me. And if you would like to say the summary of A Course in Miracles with me, that would be great. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God.